I wanted to welcome everyone. My name is Keith Choi, and I'm the Senior Program Coordinator for the Johns Hopkins University Education and Research Center for Occupational Safety and Health. And we're very excited to jointly offer this monthly series of free webinars focusing on the unique challenges facing museum workers. Our partners for these webinars is the George Washington University um, Museum, and it's my pleasure to introduce Maria Fusco. Maria?
Hello. Thank you. Good morning to everyone and good afternoon to everyone as well. We're covering a few different time zones. And thank you guys so much for joining us here today. This is the last scheduled presentation in this series, though we're working to add on a few more presentations, so more information on that soon. But I was very just grateful and pleased that Daniëlle and Alexandra could join us today. I've been really excited to listen to their talk. So in case you've not joined our series before, just in very brief, well, number one, my name is Maria Fusco. I'm head of conservation at the George Washington University Museum and the Textile Museum in DC. And the series started off just because we were kind of working our way through trying to build safer practice in our museum and trying to partner with people in the occupational environmental health community to help us in that. And as we were doing that, we learned a lot, and then we started working with other colleagues and other museums who were doing similar things. So just wanted to kind of put together a presentation series that kind of covered, what we were doing, what others are doing, really just to share information and help us all, reduce the repetition of efforts, help each other out, especially across hemispheres and bodies of water and such. So today we have, and I apologize, I am home with a sick kid, so my dogs might be barking in the background. I'm sorry about that. But today we have, some really esteemed colleagues joining us from the Netherlands. Daniëlle Mark, who's from the Rijksmuseum, who's in a very interesting position there and sort of, a very unique position looking just at safety. So I'll let her introduce herself a little more capably. And Alexandra van Kleef is from the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands. So they're going to talk today on their efforts as well as kind of studies done at the CollectieCentrum Nederland, or the Collection Center of the Netherlands, and also a hazardous heritage working group that exists in the Netherlands. So I will turn things over to them now, and please enjoy.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Maria. I'm going to share my screen to start the presentation. Is my presentation visible to all? Yes,
it is.
Thank you. I can see. Thank you. Okay. As mentioned, I am the Chemical Safety Officer of the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and my work concerns the chemical safety in the Ateliergebouw, the building where the conservation studios and laboratories of the Rijksmuseum, the University of Amsterdam, and the Dutch Cultural Heritage Agency are housed. The museum and the agency also share an off-site storage facility, CCNL, CollectieCentrum Nederland. They asked me to coordinate a project looking into the chemical safety of the colleagues working there with the collections. My presentation will discuss the approach and the results of the exposure assessment to hazardous compounds in heritage that we conducted. Dutch occupational health and safety legislation protects employees working in the Netherlands from all occupational health risks, including working with hazardous substances. The guidelines regarding hazardous substances within health and safety legislation are mainly originating from data coming from routine work tasks in relation to specific harmful substances or mixtures. More elaborate guidelines are written when occupational diseases and fatalities have been correlated with these work tasks. To formally assess occupational exposure, guidelines from health and safety legislation must be followed. Every company is obligated to document and assess all risk present within the company following the guidelines to carry out a risk identification and evaluation. This includes work tasks with harmful substances. To comply with health and safety legislation regarding chemicals, all chemicals need to be registered within a set format, and for each chemical in relation to a work task, exposure needs to be calculated and/or measures. This also applies to compounds which can be referred to stoffen zonder eigenaar. compounds without owners. This refers to non-bound, harmful substances that can pose an exposure risk, usually when mechanical processes are involved. This can refer to asbestos, quartz dust, welding fumes, but also substances coming from heritage. Chemicals can enter your body via injection orally through dermal absorption or inhalation. Dermal exposure depends heavily on work practices, contact frequency, the physical form of the substance, and its ability to penetrate the skin. Oral exposure typically occurs through indirect behaviors, usually hand-to-mouth contact. If safety measures are in place in relation to the risks that are present, dermal and oral exposure can easily be prevented. Most occupational exposure limits relate to airborne concentrations. In many occupational settings, airborne exposure to vapors, gases, aerosol, or dust represents the largest contribution to an employee's total exposure. As a result, inhalation risk often drives overall health concerns and risk management priorities. Because of these reasons, in an exposure risk inventory, inhalation exposure is usually the most formally and quantitatively assessed route. When measuring chemical inhalation exposure, safety and health legislation requires following the NEN guideline that is mentioned in the slide. This standard is designed to provide reliable conclusions when exposure is measured and assessed. Its underlying principle assumes that exposure sources are relatively stable and tasks are somewhat routine, making it an effective method for assessing systematic exposure risks. Just gonna take a small sip of water. In the NEN guideline, exposure is assessed through personal sampling over the course of a workday. Employees carry out a full workday following their normal routine while personal sampling takes place. During the day, they will perform tasks involving the exposure source of interest. By sampling the full workday, it is possible to assess occupational exposure in relation to the 8-hour exposure limits. This process is repeated across multiple employees to increase the reliability of results. However, applying this method to assess exposure when working with hazardous heritage presents some challenges. While certain tasks may be routine, the work cannot generally be considered routine in relation to potential exposure sources. The tasks are performed on a variety of objects rather than repeated on the same objects. And exposure depends on factors such as size, material, and previous treatments of the objects, as well as the type of handling, including monitoring, transport, cleaning, and packaging. At the Rijksmuseum and within CCNL, we have made the decision to deviate slightly from these guidelines to measure exposure coming from hazardous heritage. Following the cautionary principle, we aim to measure worst-case scenarios. CollectieCentrum Nederland, Collection Centrum of the Netherlands, is a large storage facility that opened in 2021. It's a partnership on which collection is stored of the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands, Royal Palace at Loon, the Netherlands Open Air Museum. This building is multiple stories high and each floor consists of several rooms containing different objects. When CCNL was built, sustainability was one of the main priorities in the design. And this is reflected in all aspects of the building, including the ventilation system. The ventilation in the depot areas have been optimized from a sustainability perspective to minimize energy consumption. And as a result, the ventilation rate is intentionally lower than in regular workspaces. This is appropriate for storage conditions, but it may allow airborne substances to accumulate more easily. So why are we assessing exposure at CCNL? Employees at CCNL have shared their observations, mainly about odor intensity differences compared to previous depots where parts of the collection had been stored previously. They had also asked questions regarding hazardous heritage and if this would affect their work environment. Our goal is not only to assess exposure risk from potentially harmful compounds, but also to ensure that all employees feel safe. Because just as it is essential to work safely, it is equally important to feel safe in the workplace. Instead of examining every potential individual exposure source and scenario, we approach CCNL as a whole. To ensure we chose the most effective approach, we decided to focus on identifying the maximum realistic exposure scenarios and measuring those. Although the Rijksmuseum and the agency have laboratories and are able to identify hazardous compounds, they are not an accredited laboratory for health and safety. They can't give advice on occupational safety, and above all, they should not assess their own safety. Therefore, an external accredited laboratory was hired, RPS. Most commercial parties in the Netherlands offering these services regarding health and safety are not very familiar with hazardous heritage, and communicating our special needs and concerns can be quite challenging. Understandably, their focus is primarily on applying the guidelines set out in legislation. As mentioned before in the previous slides, Dutch safety and health legislation is mainly designed for routine work, which working with hazardous heritage is not. And as a result, applying these guidelines often yields a limited amount of data that can only be applied to cases with same exposure scenarios to those previously assessed. Our goal is to gather data that can support assessment across a broader range of future scenarios. We landed on the following research questions. What exposure risks are present within CCNL? How can exposure be assessed at CCNL to enable prediction of future exposure sources and risk? And is it possible to use X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, it's a Dutch naming, my apologies, to pre-assess potential exposure sources? The third research question, it concerns exploring what is possible with our in-house equipment, starting with the handheld XRF. This is a mobile X-ray technique that can perform elemental analysis. It is also considered non-invasive. To optimize the approach, it was needed to bring together experts. And this started, of course, with 2 employees of CCNL, Dennis Kemper and Nina Buitenhuis, our colleagues of the Dutch Cultural Heritage Agency, Agnes Brokerhoff, Guusje Hartenveld, and of course also Alexandra van Kleef, and myself. We started with multiple digital meetings to set up a plan, and it became clear it would be beneficial to analyze the air quality and dust samples in multiple depots. Additionally, we also decided to assess potential exposure risk when cleaning historical carpets. And why are we assessing cleaning carpets? It is because the employees doing the cleaning of these large carpets from palaces and historic houses, in some cases found large amount of dust sticking to their skin and coming out of their nose. Suspecting that these carpets were treated with pesticides like DDT and lindane in the past, this caused some major concerns. After a few digital meetings, we decided on the following. We wanted to evaluate the possibility of using the handheld XRF for pre-assessing of chlorinated hydrocarbon pesticides. We wanted to analyze air quality in several depots over an 8-hour period, representing a full working day, by conducting a VOC screening and separate analysis for aldehydes in depots where they are expected to be present, and mercury in depots where there are a large number of mercury mirrors. We wanted to analyze collected dust samples from depots and from 3 carpets. We did not want to focus on fresh dust, but dust that had been accumulated in the room for the dust samples from depots. This would serve as an indication of potential harmful particles that may come from objects that are or have been in the depot. These samples would be analyzed for historic pesticides, their degradation products and byproducts, and arsenic and lead. We would also conduct personal sampling to take place during the historic carpet cleaning, analyzing inhalable dust, pesticides, arsenic, and lead. To finalize the approach, our plan of action and requirements were shared with RPS, and a meeting with them was arranged at CCNL. The goal was to determine the sampling and analysis methods to be used and to discuss which depots would be selected. For air quality assessments, the depots were selected based on specific smells, object groups, and potential risks. To select depots for dust sampling, RCE colleagues scanned several objects using the portable XRF. These results combined with historical records of the object in each depot, helped identify the depots most relevant for collecting dust samples. For the carpets, the focus was on chlorinated hydrocarbon pesticides. To identify carpets that might result in high exposure during sampling, RCE colleagues also analyzed several carpets. And we knew that at this stage, it was unlikely that the data would be decisive, as XRF provides elemental analysis and cannot reveal molecular structures. Nevertheless, we were curious to see the results. But as expected, we were not able to select carpets on this day with the help of the XRF. We did detect chlorine, but we also detected sodium, which could not rule out the presence of sodium chloride, which is common table salt. We did decide that further exploring the use of the handheld XRF for pre-assessing exposure risk could be valuable, and this research offers a useful opportunity to compare the XRF data with RPS results. So, together with RPS, we developed the following sampling plan. VOC measurements, which stands for volatile organic compounds, would be conducted in 8 depots for 8 hours each. Aldehyde measurements would also be carried out in 8 depots for the same duration, and mercury measurements would be done in 1 depot for 8 hours. For dust analysis, 5 composite dust samples would be collected and analyzed for microscopy, composition, historic pesticides and the degradation and byproducts, arsenic and lead. After RPS completes these analyses, the sample would be returned to us for in-house comparison. In addition, personal sampling would be conducted 6 times, 2 times during the cleaning of each carpet. These samples will undergo the same analysis as the composite dust samples with the addition of inhalable dust measurements. We received a quotation for this sampling plan, which was 36,000 euros. This is quite a considerable amount. And at this stage, not all analysis within the sampling plan would be essential. We therefore separated the nice to know questions from the need to know questions, resulting in a core sampling plan that could be expanded later if necessary. What we changed. For VOC screening, the number of depots was reduced from 8 to 3, and for aldehydes, the measurements were reduced from 8 to 2. 1 depot was selected instead of 2 for composite dust sample, and for the samples collected by personal sampling, the decision was made, decision was made to perform no analytical analysis at this stage. Instead, we would conduct a comparison of these samples to the composite dust samples. Personal sampling would be done using a specific filter, allowing for the possibility to perform analytical analysis at a later stage if we would still feel the need to do so. This resulted to the second and the final quotation, which was considerably less of 80,000 euros. 1 day was selected for the sampling activities, and all stationary samplers were set up in the morning and collected again after 8 hours. A composite dust sample was collected by gathering dust from several corners in the selected depot. Before the carpets were cleaned, all staff members involved received a briefing. We discussed the purpose of the exposure assessment and our approach. At this stage, we did not yet know how much dust would be released from the carpets or what components it would contain, and therefore we selected our personal protection equipment, PPE, accordingly. Extra attention was also given to the correct use of PPE, as it becomes ineffective when used improperly. We also provided guidelines on the proper use of PPE before, during, and after cleaning, ensuring that all staff members could work both safely, but also, again, feel safe. Led by Fusha Hartenveld of the agency, we developed a plan to conduct handheld XRF measurements before, during, and after cleaning of the carpet, as well as on the collected dust samples. 3 historic carpets were selected that had recently arrived at CCNL and had likely not yet been cleaned before. We did not yet know what to expect. For each carpet, 2 people wore a personal dust sampler during cleaning. This first carpet was a very large carpet that arrived folded. During unfolding, parts of the carpet were lifted in the air for a moment to decrease the surface. When these parts hit the ground, small dust clouds could be seen, but they seemed to settle quickly and not linger in the air. Some team members continued removing creases, so to make sure the carpet would lay flat, while others began to vacuum. We continued visually monitoring the dust in the air during cleaning and received a really helpful tip from RPS that I would like to share. If you turn on your flashlight of your phone, for example, and you point it down and upwards, the dust floating in the air becomes very visual. And for this carpet, with and without the flashlight, we did not see visual dust in the air, with exception of during unfolding. But however, dust was immediately visible on the floor, in close proximity of the carpet. This dust seemed to spread very easily, and we could also see it on everything that it came into contact with. During cleaning, there was another aspect that we closely monitored, and this was the physical condition of the people cleaning the carpets while wearing heavy PPE. The whole team was very cooperative and eager to help, putting them at risk to go over their physical limits. During briefing, it was mentioned on how restrictive and draining wearing this PPE could be, but the physical impact can still catch you off guard. After cleaning this first carpet, we had a first debriefing to discuss methods changes for when cleaning the next two carpets. The visual observation during the first carpet did not show a high risk of inhalation exposure. If this would also been seen when cleaning the next two carpets, we could scale down the needed PPE to relieve physical strain. For the next two carpets, we did start with full PPE again, and no visual dust again was seen floating in the air. The team was immediately informed of this, and they were allowed to switch to a dust mask and to take the hood off of the overall if they wanted to. I do have to mention these carpets took significantly less time cleaning than the first carpet that was very large. We had a final debriefing at the end of the day to discuss the process and our initial findings. The team expressed that they felt safe and supported throughout the process, but it was a very long day for everyone, and everyone who was involved in the cleaning felt very tired and physically drained afterwards. Without having the analytical results yet, we could already conclude that the amount of exposure to particle matter from the carpets during handling and vacuuming was actually probably quite small. This did not match with the sum of the past experience of dust exposure that has previously been expressed by the team. And we had hoped that at least one of these carpets would show us the amounts of dust that was previously described. The air quality screening for VOCs and aldehydes produced the following results. This overview lists all detected compounds together with the Dutch long-term occupational exposure limits. In the comments column, it is indicated whether the substance can be absorbed through the skin, is carcinogenic, may affect the fertility or harm the unborn child. Next to this, the measured concentration is shown, and in yellow, the percentage of that concentration relative to the occupational exposure limit. Unfortunately, none of these detected substances exceeded their exposure limit, and for this reason, no further air quality analysis is required for now. This overview shows the pesticides, arsenic, and lead detected in the composite samples. Arsenic and lead have established Dutch exposure limits, but no exposure limits were provided by RPS for the pesticides and their byproducts. For this, they did refer to the ALARA principle, as some pesticides are carcinogenic, which means exposure should be as low as reasonably achievable. These pesticides no longer have registered occupational exposure limits in the Netherlands because they are not permitted for workplace use. This illustrates a common challenge when dealing with hazardous heritage materials. For arsenic and lead, the percentage relative to the critical concentration metal and dust exposure limit is also shown in yellow. The personal and stationary samples were only compared microscopically with the composite carpet samples. The concentration of inhalable dust was assessed, and the percentage relative to the long-term occupational exposure limit was low for all samples, which is good news. In terms of composition, the composite carpet sample consists mainly of textile fibers, while the personal exposure samples consist predominantly of sand particles. Sand, metal, and textile particles were present in all samples. Conclusion: no mercury was detected in the air sample. We expect that the bags beneath the mercury mirrors contain not only liquid mercury, if mercury was to be released from the mirror, but that it also helps to prevent the release of mercury vapors into the air. None of the detected compounds in the air samples exceeded their exposure limits, but for all compounds that have qualities that are carcinogenic, mutagenic, or reprotoxic, the ALARA principle continues to apply. At least that is in the Netherlands. That is within the Dutch safety and health legislation. Arsenic, lead, and several pesticides have been detected in the composite depot dust sample. These detected concentrations are quite low, and because this composite sample consists of accumulated dust, immediate exposure concerns are limited. Cleaning and hygiene procedures remain essential, of course, to minimize potential exposure and spread of contamination. Arsenic, lead, and several pesticides have been detected in all composite dust samples as well. Arsenic and lead were detected in higher concentrations, but again, they did not exceed their exposure limits. We also saw quite some dust coming from the carpet within the area where the carpet was being cleaned. This reminded us how important it is to set up a protocol preventing the spread of contamination, and that cleaning and hygiene protocols are therefore essential. A clear difference in particle type ratios was also observed between the composite carpet samples and the personal dust samples. The carpet samples were dominated by textile fibers, while the personal samples contained mainly sand fibers. This pattern was consistent across all 3 sessions and may indicate that sand particles are more likely to become airborne than textile particles when cleaning these historical carpets. This would be a positive finding, as the detected pesticides are likely bound to the textile fibers, but this still is a very limited amount of data to draw any conclusions. Visual monitoring of airborne dust can be a reliable method to assess potential inhalation exposure. In our study, no visible dust was observed, and all analyzed inhalable dust concentrations were very low. When cleaning these historical carpets, we did not see a worst case scenario as described by the staff of CCNL. But in this case, we do not need additional data to set up an effective protocol. Harmful substances can be expected to be present in and or on historical carpets, and with the limited amount of data currently available, the amount and type of particles that may become airborne during cleaning cannot be reliably predicted, and it may also not be realistic to aim for such precision. Therefore, each unknown carpet will be approached as a worst-case scenario until visually assessed otherwise. As for the next steps, we aim to develop a protocol for safely cleaning historic carpets, and we would like to explore whether it is possible to provide guidance on how to scale down PPE, given how physically demanding working in full PPE could be. We want to analyze the composite dust samples, mainly with the handheld XRF, but we have not received the dust samples yet, so we are still waiting on that. And the last aspect is we really would like to explore the options for assessing chlorinated hydrocarbon pesticides with the XRF. If there's anyone within this group that has any experience on this subject, I would like to ask you to please reach out. That would be very nice. And I just want to say a quick thank you for everyone who was involved. Thank you. And then I would like to give the word to my colleague, Alexandra, if that is okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. If you will, yeah, that's my first slide. First of all, I don't see any questions in the chat, but if people have any questions for us after the presentations, questions are very, very welcome. My name is Alexandra van Kleef. I work for the Dutch Cultural Heritage Agency, and that's part of the Dutch Ministry of Education and Culture. And I work there as an collection management advisor. I founded a working group on hazardous heritage beginning of last year, not just for the fun of it, but because I feel it's necessary. So next slide, please. The timing was right for a working group. Why? Because this topic really resonates in the Dutch museums. A lot of things are going on, happening at the same time. In 2003, there were random asbestos inspections in museum collections, also in the artworks and in all the other objects, historical objects. And it caused a bit of a panic, and people started calling us. So what do we do? Our National Library is, of course, involved in the Poisonous Book project. And other things that were happening is repatriation of objects from a colonial context. And in the meantime, when they were here in the Netherlands, they were sprayed with DDT, for example. It's quite safe if it's put in a glass case, but of course not if it's being used in rituals and etc. Also, laws and regulations changed in the last couple of years when it comes to radioactive materials. So even for ceramics, like you see in the picture in the Netherlands, you need to have like a permit to keep those in your collection. It makes it quite complicated to deal with these objects. The building and use of shared storage buildings for museums, like the collection center Daniëlle spoke of, but also regional collection centers that are being built as we speak. Moving collections and sharing storage brings up all kinds of new problems, and hazardous heritage is just one of them. And so we get a lot of questions about hazardous objects, of objects and substances from museum professionals at the Cultural Heritage Agency. And knowing all the answers is, of course, our main goal, but we can't do it alone. So if you can please show the next slide. We reached out to museum professionals, experts, experienced collection managers from a few of the museums you see here on the slide, and also from academic collections and from the National Library to join us in thinking of what can we do to help collection managers in the Netherlands with this topic of hazardous heritage. If you can show the next slide, please. This is our focus at the moment: asbestos, arsenic, mercury, radioactive materials, and pesticides. Of course, there's a lot more, lead, naphthalene, formaldehyde, and we will probably deal with these topics as well in the near future, but we can't do everything at the same time. So this is our first focus of the working group. The next slide, please. And what are we working towards? Now, of course, awareness, without causing a panic. That's a challenge in itself. The most practical outcome that we were working towards is a roadmap and how to. I will go into that in the next slides, but also a database, because a lot of people contact us. How do we recognize these objects with hazardous substances? So we're trying to collect a database with examples of objects to help identification and to help collection managers to know what to look for. Terminology, it's of course helpful if everyone uses the same names for these hazardous materials. So we try to separate the substance names from the brand names, for example. And context with the health and safety professionals, but also with the policy makers, because all lawmakers, the laws and the regulation is, I think everyone recognizes that, is mostly not specifically for museums. So it makes it difficult if you work in a museum to use these laws for the objects you're trying to protect. Next slide, please. The roadmap. Yeah, it's actually, it will contain all the tips and tricks for dealing with objects with potentially hazardous substances. What you see here is we collected questions from the museums. What do you need in a roadmap? So what to do and what not to do within the framework of the legal system and the common museum practice and procedures. We will all deal with that. For example, risk assessment, of course, the personal protection, how to do a quick scan, how to catalog these objects with hazardous materials, how to handle them, and what to do when there is an emergency. And can you still exhibit objects with hazardous materials? Can you still lend them? Transportation is a whole other topic, of course. And are they worth the fuss? Or is it better to dispose of them? And if you dispose of them, how do you do that when these objects contain hazardous chemicals? But some objects are, of course, worth keeping in the collection, but how do you handle them then? And how do you deal with all the regulations? And when do you need a permit? Sorry. Next slide, please. In the meantime, network is growing, internationally, of course, as well. We're so happy to be here in this international company. For example, we work also with Belgium, because in Belgium, there is also a hazardous heritage network. And of course, we speak the same language. That makes it easy. We have a LinkedIn group as well, where we deal with questions, cases, best practices, and we can share it when we have something to share, like a publication. So we're gathering knowledge and learning from experience and trying to use that in our articles for our knowledge database. 2 articles are already online. They are in Dutch, but maybe with Google Translate, you can see what's in it. One is the general article about hazardous heritage. The other is about arsenic in collections. And at the moment, asbestos in collections is also almost ready to be published. So we hope to publish it before the end of this year. And if you have any questions or if you want to reach out, this is my contact details. I think the slides are going to be shared afterwards. So everyone is just free to get in touch. So that's my very brief outline of the working group. Questions?
Daniëlle and Alexandra, thank you both so much. Yeah, it's winter, so I think everyone's coughing. Thank you both so much. I have pages of notes that I've written down and questions. This is absolutely fascinating and very, very impressive. Thank you so much for all your good work and for describing it to us. And so everyone, I neglected to mention, I'm sorry, earlier in the chat, but please feel free to ask questions. I've got a few here. Maybe I'll kick us off with that, but feel free to post them in the chat and then I will ask them on your behalf. Or you could also unmute to ask them as well. But first question from Margaret Grace Mooney. Daniëlle, are all 3 of the rugs pile woven technique? Were they like tapestry technique?
Oh, sorry. That's a question that I think Alexandra could perhaps answer better than I can.
To be honest, I don't know what pile technique is. I don't.
It looked like they might have been. Sometimes people have like paleems, which are a tapestry woven, almost like a flat rug, and then there's rugs that have a weave structure and then knots that make a pile. It kind of looked like they were pile. Well, yeah, I don't know. Do you know if they had little like almost a velvety surface?
I think
sometimes
they were knotted, so like with little.
I think so.
Yeah, a lot of rugs, it's warp and weft, and then little short bits of fiber are knotted at each intersection, and that forms the pile. And so
Yeah.
I think maybe Margaret, please feel free to unmute if you want to ask directly too. Probably there's differences in how thorough you might be with cleaning. You know, with like a tapestry woven, like a clean, it's just a flat surface so you can get in there more. With pile, there might be more topography to deal with, more elements to deal with.
That's
Yeah,
a
I
really
think the
good
latter is
question.
actually the case. Yeah. Sorry.
I think for us, our main aspects that we were looking at carpets that were used as floor carpets, as they were to gather more dirt as well, or more dust. But also mainly if it were made from animal fibers, as they are more prone to degradation from microorganisms and thus also treated with pesticides. So that's the main aspects which we now considered. We at first didn't expect that the carpets would be included within this exposure assessments. So I think this might be a subject that we want to look into a little bit, explore a little bit further in the future. But for now, for the protocol, we have what we need. Yeah.
No, and that was really interesting to me too. Just my background is in textile conservation, so just it looks like you guys probably vacuumed the face and the reverse, just in a grid pattern.
Yep.
Excuse me. And let's see, I had another question just totally slipped out of my head. Oh, but it was also really interesting just to see. I liked how you guys interlaced lower tech methods too of observing the dust on PP&E, um, examining microscopically dust. And I guess did you collect things through the vacuum nozzles, like putting muslin in, or were they wipe samples, but looking at that under the microscope just to see what was mobile, what was not? I mean, that was interesting to me to see too, that you were finding that it was the fibers were mostly saying, bound more to the rug. The dust particles, what you're finding on the PPE, and thus maybe mobile.
That's a really good question. We have not assessed the dust on the PPE. We
Okay.
have, for this first step, decided to analyze a composite dust sample in which everything that was vacuumed inside of a clean vacuum bag was analyzed. So what we see here visible on the floor was, of course, also vacuumed afterwards, including with what was vacuumed on the carpet itself. Yeah,
Okay,
I hope
very
that answers
good.
the question.
No, that does, and that's really interesting. I don't mean just to bring it into textiles, but we do find like how do you sample, and people will put muslin in the vacuum line basically, or just taking from the dust bag that's collecting the dust, sampling from the floor around. It's just good. It's helpful to hear corroboration of other people doing similar techniques. And we have these queries a lot of time. Well, what about sampling out of the dust bag? What about sampling here? So to see people doing that is good
And if I could
information.
just comment on what you're saying, because it is true, and I think it's really viable to have these discussions on sampling and what you want to sample and how you want to assess exposure. We have discussed several options, and we wanted now, well, as mentioned, to assess it more as a worst case scenario. So the entirety of the dust to see what we could find. So more qualitative result than a quantitative result. As for the composite carpet samples, the personal dust samples would be more interesting, of course, for immediate exposure risk, as that would also be the exposure part. But there are many ways to do this. But I think that's also can be the tricky part regarding these questions of focusing on very specific aspects. There is so much that you want to know, so much that you can explore and can know, but what are the questions that you need to know to make a statement regarding health and safety or regarding exposure? And that is what we are trying to pinpoint, because I do notice my brain is deviating from these questions, creating more and more questions, and then I'm trying to pull myself back to say, no, this is what we must know to give an indication regarding the safety questions that we have present. And if needed, we can explore further, or if we have time, for example, then we can also explore further. And we hope to do that also with in-house methods, which is something that Guusje Hartenveld is more involved in.
No, I think it's a very, very important point that you're making. It's hard to make advancement on these kind of projects because you can get kind of stunned and incapacitated by the volume of information. And as soon as you learn one thing, you have you have maybe part of an answer, you generate 5 more questions, and you can get lost in a maze. So simply the concept of experimental design in these projects is so important. You're right, just to keep a focus and to pull things back to, what are my questions? Where did I start? What we have this phrase in the US, where does the rubber meet the road? So just what is most kind of relevant? And we found too, we got kind of stunned by, we have so many pieces in our collections. How do we test them all? Can we test for everything? But by pulling it back to, I wouldn't say what really mattered, but what mattered most to the personnel, and just looking at, well, what is present, but what is detaching? And almost the what's detaching is for us at the moment more relevant. And I think that helped us not become incapacitated. And so thank you for mentioning that, because I think just being very intentional about how you create your experimental design in any sort of research project, but these kind of projects equally is important to keep you on track, and to make sure you can get answers to people too. So thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you.
Let's see, there's another question. Aniko Bazur, I'm very sorry if I'm saying your name. You've joined before and asked great questions, and you're doing interesting work yourself, it seems. So thank you for chiming in, and feel free to unmute if you want. Thank you so much for your great talk. I'd be interested in learning how the dust samples were collected on filters, and if you had a chance to perhaps analyze the filters with your handheld XRF before they were analyzed by the external lab. So you talked a little bit about this. Would you mind expanding a little bit?
Yes, I will go to the slide regarding visually seeing these samples. Let me read. Sorry, would you mind repeating the question?
I'm sorry, yes. It was a question
sorry.
about, oh no, it's fine. You're doing wonderfully in a second language, which I really appreciate. Thank you. I'd be interested to learn how the dust samples were collected on filters. I think maybe the filters in the vacuum, maybe, but Aniko, please unmute if I'm misrepresenting you. And if you had a chance to perhaps analyze the filters with your handheld XRF before they were analyzed by the external lab.
That's a really good question. I pulled up the slide regarding the samples of the personal samples that were sampled on a filter, and a composite sample. So the samples of the composite samples were just the dust bags itself, not with the filter, because it also collected quite a large amount of dust and dirt, which was expected. And for each carpet, there was a mixed sample made, so to say. We did not analyze the filters of the personal samples. We have also not included that within the scope of the questions we want to explore regarding XRF for now. And that's mainly because the personal sampling is the main related health question. And we feel we are overstepping the boundary if we are going to fully answer safety questions, as we are not an accredited laboratory for health and safety. We are a research facility. So we wanted to keep that separate as well. The filters, I'm not certain if they have kept it. There was a possibility to use different filters that would be destructed, but these filters, they remain compact and with everything, the dust still on top present. And the reason why we did this was for analysis further done by the company RPS, not by ourselves, but we did want it to keep the option of the possibility to perform the same analytical analysis if we did see more, higher concentrations within the inhalable dust and also within the composition. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thanks so much for addressing my question. It's very interesting to see, I think you really outlined it very well, kind of the limitations of what in-house science can really do when it comes to this type of occupational safety decision making. So I really appreciated that perspective. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you. And Danielle, just to make sure I'm understanding, so the composite samples on the side are from the dust bag from the vacuum,
Yes,
and the
indeed.
personal are from the people vacuuming in some manner.
Yes, I should have elaborated that a little bit more. I can quickly, I think, show, oh, sorry, here. What we can see here, of course, the people vacuuming the carpet. So this is one carpet, this is one session. And then we see two people with a black strap around their waist and body, which contains a pump with the sampler for the collecting the exposure, inhalation, sampling. I'm sorry I didn't elaborate a little bit more during my presentation, but it's a really good question. Then we also had a stationary dust in air sampler, which is seen on a couple of the pictures, just on a statif on the stand, which collected the dust in the air for the duration of all 3 sessions to see if a person would be in the room, what exposure risks would be potentially present. The personal dust samplers were to see what would be the inhalation exposure risk, also in relation to composition, of course, for the people actually cleaning the carpets. And we did 3 separate sessions. That was the first session. And these 2 sessions were done side by side, in which we did not mix or cross-contaminate each other's carpets, if that makes sense. So the vacuums used for one carpet were only used for one carpet, and also that applied to the people wearing the personal sampling.
Pretty good. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. We have more questions. Oh, are there HEPA filters on the vacuums that you used?
Yes, that's a good question. Yes. So no filters for sampling. Sorry, no filters for sampling, but in these filters for preventing it really being released from the vacuum itself.
Good. Yes, we try to use those fairly standardly here too, just in most vacuums, again, just for safety purposes. So that's, again, good to hear things corroborated. Another question from one of your colleagues. Let's see. Yes. So your colleague Gusa, is that how you pronounce it?
Perhaps?
Chimed in too. Just
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to respond to Annike's question about analyzing the filters, and as Daniëlle mentioned, we are proceeding with more research on this topic, and especially with handheld XRF. So I will definitely keep that in mind for our further research plan.
Thank you, Risha.
That's why it's nice to have forums like these, just to kind of generate ideas and know what has worked for people, what has not worked. You know, as I say, like a negative result is still a result to save other people time, but also to build consensus on what are good paths to continue on and share information. So thank you. And another one of your colleagues, Agnes, in the past, we have extracted filters and analyzed the extract with GCMS for pesticides. Detecting chlorine with XRF is not always simple or conclusive. Yes, I've heard this as well. Let's see. And when you say with the GCMS analysis, was that, I guess, did you take samples and then dissolve this and it was ran through a GCMS, or were they airborne samples that were collected?
Sorry, let me go back to the sampling plan. So GCMS has been used by RPS as well for the detection of pesticides and their byproducts and their degradation products. But this is something we can also explore in-house. So this is not something I have mentioned. And Agnes, she's very experienced in pesticides, which why she was definitely also included within the expert group of CCNL assessment. the plan is to explore further XRF analysis, but also other in-house techniques, which also include GCMS, perhaps also on the composite dust samples. I hope we receive them soon because we are still waiting on them. The company RPS has been quite busy lately, so contact has been a little bit slow, which is a bit unfortunate, but it's understandable as well.
Very good. We're trying to explore some in-house GCMS analysis too with our museum as part of university and with our health and safety department. So I might come to you guys and to you, Agnes, and with some questions for sure. Another question from Margaret Geis-Mooney. Daniëlle, can you explain the flashlight tip again? It sounded like you were using raking lights, sort of.
Yeah, the reflectance of the dust particles, which I think can be referred to or can be compared to, for example, if you turn on the light at home after dusting, you can see the dust specks very clearly in the light reflecting when they are airborne. And that is the same principle that is applied here. So visually, without this tip, you can already see if there's dust forming, as I saw some dust clouds pretty close to the ground during unfolding. But I found this a very helpful tip. So during the duration of cleaning, at a couple of moments, we used the flashlight and directing it both ways. And we did not see anything, fortunately, but this is something that I can definitely recommend. I tried it at home as well after dusting, because then you do see a lot more dust, and it works pretty well.
I mean, it's a good idea because, like, if you do see light coming in the late afternoon through a window, you can sometimes see the dust particles and see how dusty your house is, whereas you may not see it before. So it's a good, really simple tip. How do you guys manage, we find too, sometimes we need to use personal devices like a phone or a laptop or something. How do you guys manage, if you're using them, do you wipe them down with alcohol wipes afterwards, or how do you manage using devices like that? I've seen too, a colleague that works more in stained glass here in the US, they post on their website too. I'll see if I can find it and share it. Kind of putting cell phones inside Ziploc bags and using them so that they're not contaminating their phones. But how do you guys approach stuff like that? Because a lot of times when you get down to the nuts and bolts of things and contamination transfer, those are helpful tips to share too, I think.
Absolutely. We do assess these things also case by case. I'm trying to also accommodate personal preferences, but we do try to make it visual. We actually had a workshop not that long ago from the working group of hazardous heritage, given to a group of, different employees of different musea of the Netherlands. Where we made it more visual. If you have a phone that is contaminated, what would happen if you are coming into contact with a harmful substance, and how easily it can transfer to your phone and to your laptop, which was unfortunately, but also good, very recognizable for many people. But the first step is creating awareness. So I have to just say, I just want to mention that these are the employees of RPS who did not participate in any handling, but they did share the same PPE, as we did not know how much would be within the room, how much exposure risk was present in and around the room, mainly in the room, of course. So that's why they are also wearing full PPE for the first session. So this is not an immediate contamination risk, but this is something that is present everywhere. People also use their phone during experiments or doing other work, for example, taking pictures or having contact. So I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but the first step is definitely awareness. And then we just try to share some tips. So indeed, for example, putting it in a plastic bag is a very helpful example. Sometimes it can be more beneficial to work with just paper and a pen. That's with the pen you write with just, dirty gloves, for example, or dirty hands, and the pen is thrown away afterwards. That can be a method. It's not very sustainable, but for some cases that might be more useful. And my preferred method for most cases, making sure you have a clean hand and a contaminated hand or potentially contaminated hand, usually with a clear division of wearing one glove and having no glove, creating a very visual effect of this can be contaminated. I'm only handling potentially contaminated resources with this hand and only clean up materials, laptops, phones with this hand. So that's my preferred method, but it really depends on the case and what people are handling and how people are working with it. But it remains difficult because people tend to easily grab their phone when not noticing it. Yeah. I hope I answered your question.
You did.
Somewhat.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I have a question for Alexandra too, just about, or many questions actually. The work of your working group is absolutely fantastic. I have many questions. I guess the first one is just, how are you working with, it sounds like you're developing really robust resources within the Netherlands and you're working a lot with your colleagues in Belgium too. Can you talk a little bit about that collaboration a little more? You've talked about the fact that you're, both posting articles of relevance and talking to each other, but I think that kind of collaboration is a good model for the rest of us. And indeed, I think in each of our countries, we might have our own working groups. And if we can get to the point where I think they are talking already, and some members are in, some people are members in multiple international groups. I'd love to hear more about how you guys manage that, what you collaborate on in a little more detail, because I think it's a great model.
I don't know if Peter is still in the group. Peter Looks from ETWI in Belgium. He is actually one of the contestants. Peter, are you still there, or did you leave? Peter is still there. Peter is involved with the Hazardous Heritage Network in Belgium. He founded it, and we try to stay in touch during this whole process because we're doing similar things. I'm also looking for contacts in England as well because I don't know if you know the website hazardsincollections.org.uk. It's actually quite a nice website from the Museum of London. So that's on my list to contact as well. So we're just talking to a lot of people and trying to get everyone to get in touch with us, so we can share what we learned and learn from what they learned. And as we go on, we try to publish everything on our website. And in Belgium, it's the same. They also have a knowledge database, so they can post it as well.
I look forward to looking at your website for certain. I mean, because the chemistry is all the same. They're the same pesticides. Chemistry is universal. The biology is the same because we're all human. And in different countries, there may be slightly different legislations, or there might be different ethos in how much the government has oversight. But those can be guiding principles, but oftentimes we go a little bit beyond even what we're required to by our government. So that's very interesting.
I think that only like legal things and regulation is different per country. I think in Europe it's maybe a bit easier because there's European legislation as well. It's the same for Belgium and for the Netherlands, of course, and not so much for the UK, but other countries as well around us. So we have to deal with the same regulation, but it's difficult if it's not the same. Some are more strict.
Exactly.
Can I just briefly mention, I really want to say as well that Alexandra is really such a positive and motivational force within this working group. And she really brings together people who are passionate about this subject. And that's so helpful. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
No, it is because they're a scary topic. So I think someone being a positive leading force to keep momentum going too.
Absolutely.
Do you meet virtually like a couple times a year, or how do you manage things like that?
The working group meets once every 2 months about. And we have we have an app group, and we talk online, and we have the LinkedIn group. So we have all these kinds of communication going on. And we're working on documents together. We have this space we can work in, like a Google Docs kind of space. So we can contribute all at the same time.
And the workshop you do workshops as well. That sounds, I almost wonder if like international workshops could be conducted. You guys have had some great ideas. think we're a little over time. I don't know, Danielle and Alexandra, can you stay on just a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, let me see if there's more questions. Oh, sending a big hug from Mexico. So, and yes, everyone, yes, lots of nice comments as well in the chat. Let me see. Yeah, I think Alexander too, the different focuses of the working group, the roadmap, the thesaurus, and contacts within government. Um, these are all fantastic kind of subgroups. The roadmap of, so you're talking in there about how to deal with hazards, tips and tricks. And for that, you kind of collected questions from museums in terms of what information was needed, what people were curious about. I'm wondering too, how have you guys worked a lot? Who is in your working group, I guess? Are they a lot of museum professionals? Do you have professionals who are industrial hygienists or people that work in environmental health or occupational health? How do you kind of, I'm always curious about how people work on communicating about hazards and, sharing information that isn't too much, but isn't too little and not making people panic and, so who have you worked with and how do you guys balance information sharing?
Yeah, we had someone who was an occupational health professional, but she left to work in a hospital actually. So she left the museum world. But we're trying to get like the health and safety professionals together as well, because we know a lot about handling objects and museum work, but we miss that kind of health and safety knowledge. So we try to talk to people who are more of that side and try to get them together. So all the health and safety and the policymakers and the museum professionals, so we can actually change experiences and ask each other questions. So we talk a lot. I think that's basically what we do. We talk a lot to people and try to get as much information going and sharing of knowledge and sharing of experiences.
Absolutely. No, and finding people in other fields, a lot of times these are their normal working skills, which is, assessing risk and communicating about risk. And so they know how to do things that we don't. And it's rather helpful to take advantage of their professional experience. And I was interested too in how you guys balance, and Danielle, how you balance the in-house analysis you could do versus when to go to an outside entity, which I think is again, very good points to make, that there are things you can do internally, and there's points at which you need help from the outside. And I think you made the point that, or maybe I just inferred it, that, sometimes getting an outside agency to assess can be helpful because they're impartial, they're a separate third party, but they can also do analysis that you can't do. So would you mind talking a little bit more about thought process or suggestions in terms of when someone might find it helpful to go out of house to a professional, like environmental testing agency or the like?
Yeah, Daniëlle has some issues with her computer at the moment, so she's trying to log on again.
Okay.
I think she can answer that question more than I do because I don't work at the lab. We are very fortunate that we have a laboratory in-house. Not everyone has that, of course, so we can do a lot in-house. But like Daniëlle explained, we are not the professionals when it comes to health and safety. So there are some things that we can't really state. But she's trying to get her computer working again.
I have another question for you, Alexandra. I think what's a nice model, and I've seen it in Europe especially, is sort of shared storage facilities where you have multiple museums storing all their items in one site. And there might even be conservators or staff working at that site too, and that's where they work. And I've seen it in Scandinavia and in Northern Europe. That model seems to really help with safety efforts and that you can pool resources. Would you mind talking a little bit more about how that informs these kind of projects? Because it seems like you guys have gotten made really good progress. And I wonder if that's part of a factor, the fact that you were sharing
yeah.
resources so much.
Yeah, actually, I started working with Hazardous Heritage when I was the project manager for the preparation for the relocation of those 4 collections to the collection center. Because that was the first time I was actually aware of these substances in the collection. We never thought about it or talked about it or were confronted with it. But when we tried to get the collections ready to move, at that point, we found out that we have asbestos, arsenic, mercury, all these problems. We had to tackle them quite quickly because we had to move quickly. But that started the whole process for this project and this working group.
Mm.
And of course, if you're handling each other's collections, because we have like one team handling all 4 collections in the collection center, so they're not only handling the objects of their own organization, but from all 4 organizations. And of course, you have to tell them, okay, you're going to handle our objects, but be aware there's asbestos or there's arsenic, so protect yourself. So that was also a factor.
Absolutely. Yeah. Danielle, I'm sorry, I had a question for you too. I'm wondering, it was interesting to me too that how you guys balanced in-house analysis with going outside to a separate party for some analysis or advisement. And that's, I think, an important point to make too, that, a lot of places won't have any resources in-house. So providing a roadmap to finding external help is, I think, a really helpful one. Do you have any tips or tricks or advice in when to go to an outside party for testing and analysis, and or advice, just the safety consultation too?
This is a really good question. I'm so sorry that I suddenly left the meeting. My computer crashed. I don't know what happened, but I joined on my phone now. But that's a really good question. We are also in a luxury position with the in-house technique that we have with the research facility that the Ateliergebouw is. And what we try to do for ourselves is start with qualitative analysis. So if something is present, is something that we need to be considering. It is also really important to rely on visual aspects, smell as well, even though smell can be tricky because every person has a very different sense of smell. But if you do tend to smell something out of the ordinary, it can be beneficial to have it assessed. Also, if you smell something very strongly and you're working in that environment for a prolonged time, it can also happen that from stress, because you're not aware if it's harmful or not, physical symptoms start to appear. So that it doesn't mean it has to be related to a harmful compound. It can also be related to stress, but both are equally as important that need to be considered. That's why I do think it's really important to feel safe as well. As the reason why I included our quotation prices is for that reason as well, because this is quite a significant amount and these analyses will be expensive. And what I have noticed in my experience when we have assessed exposure testing is when I have the question, the safety related question, and I present this to RPS, for example, we mainly work with RPS. It sometimes tends to lead to a more also expensive path because it's very reliant on what's mentioned in safety and health legislation, which is very understandable, but also very elaborate and not always giving us the data to make predictions regarding similar exposure scenarios, which is something that we do try to achieve. So it may be difficult, but it is really good to assess what is the situation, what is the aspects that you really want to know, and what is enough for us that we need to know. Something that we have also done, but for this it does require the knowledge to interpret the data, is if it's a safety related question, we have requested it to be done by an accredited lab, the analysis part, so the sampling part and the analysis part, but not the interpretation part, as it is pretty black and white data. In some cases, you only have to relate it to the exposure limits, the occupational exposure limits. That can be fairly, I think, done fairly. That is something that can be learned. And then you don't need a whole other aspects within I'm so sorry. I think I'm still recovering from my computer just all of a sudden suddenly shutting down. So I'm a bit chaotic, but I hope I answered the question a little bit. So I think mainly awareness is really important. Know what you're working with. Know the facilities within your building. That is also a really important aspect. Try to make sure that the facilities that you have, being it suction equipment or personal protection equipment, that it is suitable for the work that you're doing. Try to limit spread of contamination. That is really important. So these are just some steps in working safely. And for assessment, if assessment is needed, really try to make sure that the question of your parameters are as closely met to what you need to know, opposed what is nice to know, or what is requested of you regarding legislation. I hope that's a summary.
No, those are very good. That's good advice for someone who's done this already to people that are looking to expand their testing, just their safety programs. I hope you can oblige me with one last question.
Absolutely.
I had, and then I think we can probably wrap up. I'm sorry, actually two things. Number one, just I applaud you guys for looking at not just assessing whether people are safe, but whether they feel safe. A couple of people in this series have mentioned this too, and I think it's a very important thing to just bring up the fact that these are worrisome subjects, and attending to people's perception, their comfort level is an important factor to this, because that informs how people might take in information, how receptive they might be, how much they might get on board with safety measures. So I think that's important point to make. Thank you for making it.
Thank you.
My last question was, you mentioned you guys were going to maybe develop a rug cleaning protocol. And so I don't really have questions about the details, but how are you going to approach that? Because what I want to get with the series is process too, do you interview your textile conservators? Do you how are you going to develop this protocol?
This is a really good question. We would include all staff that is involved with cleaning of carpets, and that may be conservators, but I think it's also people who tend to handle objects. So it's a variety of different staff members as well. We have a meeting on the 9th of December with the staff members of CCNL to discuss also the report we received of RPS, and to discuss the results, and to have a space for asking questions as well. But the first question, we would include them in most steps. So my idea is to set up an indication of what are the basic aspects to try and prevent spread of contamination. So of course, making sure that you have a deviation between clean and dirty, proper cleaning protocols, and then of course including them in the steps on how do you clean the carpets, and the aspects regarding cleaning these carpets when wearing personal protection equipment. And this is something we have talked about briefly after cleaning the carpets. It was very straining wearing heavy PPE and cleaning the carpet, especially the first one. I think it definitely took over an hour. I think over 2, maybe even 2.5 hours. And there was one employee who really wanted to continue working, but we started to notice that he was feeling a little bit unwell, so we had to pull him from it as well. And afterwards, we made time to discuss this. How did you guys feel? What were the aspects that you didn't know you would encounter regarding these wearing this PPE? And one of those was sweating a lot of the Tyvek suits, which is very understandable. And we made sure that everybody had food and was well rested afterwards, of course. But this is something we want to include in the protocol as well. Because here's the thing, the carpets, as described previously, when cleaning during worst case scenarios, multiple individual employees, apart from each other, mentioned, because we had interviews as well, the scenario of cleaning carpets and then afterwards having dust everywhere and even coming out of their noses, and that they were concerned regarding this. this is not something that we now can assess before cleaning a carpet, so before unfolding, before rolling it out. And if you're not wearing the proper PPE to meet those safety needs, then you can already be exposed during the unfolding, during the unrolling of your first carpet. So we do want to try and start with every carpet to, when cleaning, that it is potentially a worst case scenario carpet. And this might be a very difficult part because people need to be comfortable in doing so. And when cleaning these carpets with visual parameters, for example, which would be mainly we be mainly relying on to see if they themselves can assess if it is possible to scale down personal protection equipment, or for during certain parts of the carpet cleaning. So, for example, during vacuuming, then you are quite high from the carpet with your breathing zone is quite high from the carpet. If you're not seeing any visual dust in the air, and if it's monitored by multiple people in multiple places, then it can be concluded that the inhalation risk for particles coming from the carpet at that stage is very low. And it might not even be needed to wearing a dust mask. But then, of course, you need to feel safe as well. So a dust mask can be fine, but the full PPE is then not needed. During the rolling of the carpet again, you're quite close to the carpet with your face. And in that case, even if you don't see any visible dust particles floating in the air, then it would still be required to wear some form of respiratory protection because you're just so close to your face. This is not something we can exclude, that inhalation exposure cannot be taking place. And the same for the Tyvek suits. As soon as you come into contact with it, you want to keep it off your clothes. You want to make sure that it is something that you're not taking home in the train to your children. It is something that you want to dispose of safely. So that is something that we think is really important. And of course, also how to wear the PPE, because if the Tyvek suit is covered and you're just taking it off, grabbing everything, then it's still on your hands. Then you can still have different ways of being exposed to it, usually mostly because of through oral absorption of oral exposure. And the same applies to the dust masks as well. So cleaning protocols, how to properly handle PPE, and hopefully, but this is something I'm not sure about if it's possible, like downscaling PPE. I hope that was a clear answer.
Yes, no, I mean, you bring up a good point, just that it's not comfortable wearing these things. And that is
No.
an important factor, because if you're uncomfortable and then you're not maybe paying attention to safety protocols just because you're annoyed, or you're, it's just harder to focus. And yeah, the Tyvek suits you sweat a lot. The gloves, your hands get sweaty. So I think it's an important thing to think of, because if people are, if it's harder to remove barriers to compliance, I think is important. We started wearing those neck fans. I don't know if they make them in Europe. They are around your neck, and it's just a fan on your face. Those seem to help us a little bit, but no, it is a legitimate factor to pay attention to.
I do have to say, because with the fans, it's a very interesting aspect, and it can be very helpful in, of course, keeping your face cool. But if it's directed to your face, it can happen that the airflow of everything that might be in the air will be also directed to your face.
Point. We wear N95 masks in these instances, but no.
Okay.
I said it, I realize, yeah, so you're... God.
It's so difficult. There's so many factors that need to be considered. So I think even if we have a protocol for it to be effective, it needs to be tested first. And this is something that we do plan to do as well. If we have a protocol and we find that some aspects in the practical sense do not tend to work in a way that anybody feels, for example, unsafe, or we do see some physical limitations regarding use of PPE, then we always want to reevaluate and to see if changes in protocol will be more effective.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. We've gone like 25 minutes over time, so I apologize, but thank you so much for
no worries. Thank you.
Obliging, and fantastic presentations to you both. I've been really eager to learn about the work you've been doing, and I appreciate you sharing it with us. And I hope this is just the start of more communications, because
me too.
Yeah, I know at least the working groups we have over on this side of the Atlantic, I'm sure would be very glad to work more with you all too. So
Thank you.
Thank
thank
you.
you all so much. And thank you everyone for joining too. We'll work to make available the recording of this presentation and slides. But thank you so much for joining, and I will email everyone if we can extend the series as well. So Alexandra and Daniëlle, thank you so much for wrapping up this portion of the series so strongly.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.